Have you ever stopped to think how a dog's instinct can change the fate of a human life in a matter of minutes? Sometimes nature speaks louder than any explanation, and that's exactly what you'll feel now when you hear the moving story of a hero. Dog who found an abandoned baby and cared for him as if he were her own puppy. Close-ups, her eyes watchful, her ears pricked, her nose sniffing the cold air. There's something just out of the frame, a silent call that many would ignore, but that a canine heart recognizes without hesitation. Do you believe a canine heart can perceive what many humans don't? Today, a dog proves it can. What you'll discover now may surprise you. In just a few minutes, she followed an almost imperceptible trail, guided by a canine maternal instinct that can't be learned from manuals. It can only be felt. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this journey reveals how dogs who save lives aren't just headlines. They're bridges between danger and hope. Imagine the silent dawn, the soft ambient sounds, and a chill that cuts through your skin. The dog slows down, sniffs the ground, lifts her head, and makes a decision that would change everything. There, vulnerable, an abandoned baby needed something we sometimes forget: warmth, protection, presence. Instead of barking aimlessly, she approached carefully, lay down beside him, offering body heat and a living shelter from the night. Have you ever been there? Not finding a baby, of course, but feeling something pulling you to act, even without fully understanding why. It is from this invisible thread that courage is born, and it is from this that this dog clung to, without promises or applause, to accomplish a real rescue. Science calls it maternal behavior. We call it love. And during those first 3 hours, yes, the first 3 hours, every gesture was decisive. The body warming the little one, the steady breathing that calmed the crying, the short rhythmic barks that would later guide humans to the right place. Anyone familiar with animal stories knows it's not coincidence, it's connection. This narrative enters our micro-niche of life-saving dogs, not as another case, but as a reminder that empathy has scent, temperature, and constancy. Have you ever felt the presence of an animal reading you from within, recognizing your pain, your fear, your need? What she did there was more than instinct. It was active care, a silent emergency protocol that kept the baby alive until daybreak. And there's a detail almost no one knows. The dog didn't move away for a second, keeping herself between the baby and the icy wind, keeping out onlookers and potential threats. When someone finally heard the barking and approached, they found a sentinel who, despite being suspicious, allowed them to approach with the calm of someone who only wants to ensure the little one is safe. From here on, you'll understand how this call brought neighbors and rescuers to the scene, and why the veterinarian who evaluated the dog said something that could change the way you view animal instinct. Stay with me until the end, because the next scene shows how a simple gesture, made at the right time, can be the difference between losing and protecting, between giving up and starting over. Now that you've seen this heroine's first step, it's time to follow up close. What happened when human voices finally arrived and the night began to give way to hope? The first human voices arrived, as if breaking a dawn spell. Careful footsteps, a low call, the flashlight trembling with emotion. The dog remained there between the baby and the wind, only turning her head to confirm those hands were of help, not of threat. When help approached, she retreated a hand's breadth and watched. Eyes moist, breathing steady, like someone who shares a precious secret only after being certain it will be in good hands. And this is where I need to speak to you very honestly. If this topic resonates with you, leave here in the comments what touched you most. It could be a memory with your dog, a feeling this scene evoked, or even a question that remains. Your word here is not just a detail. It fuels this conversation, strengthens our community, and helps others find stories that warm their hearts when the world seems too cold. If you felt the weight and beauty of this gesture, a simple like makes A huge difference. It seems small, but each like pushes this message further, like a bark that echoes and calls out to those who need to hear it. And, if you want to walk with us beyond this video, subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. It's what gives us the energy to continue telling stories of dogs who save lives, rescues that inspire, encounters that change destinies. As the rescuers adjust the thermal blanket and the blue light of the ambulance streaks across the silent street, the dog follows every movement, confident, ready to take the next step alongside us. And it is precisely at that moment, when the baby is welcomed and the four-legged heroine finally rests, that our journey advances to what comes next, where every second reveals why this night will not be forgotten. The street seemed suspended, in time, as if dawn had held its breath. Sleeping houses, shuttered windows, an old street lamp casting a pale circle of light over the cold asphalt. In this silent landscape, the dog repeated her routine, walking attentively, sniffing the wind, checking the corners as if deciphering an invisible map. She knew this neighborhood like she knows her own body. She knew where cats crossed, where motorcycles accelerated too late, where the breeze carried the scent of bread in the morning. That night, however, there was something that didn't fit in with the background of habit. An almost timid noise, like the brief tear of wet paper, and a new, fragile scent that cut through the cold like a line of hidden truth. The first decision came without debate. Her head lifted, her ears swiveled, her body leaned like an arrow. The mentality that guided her wasn't abstract reasoning, it was an ancient memory engraved in her bones. When something small calls, you answer. Each step on the frozen ground had a purpose, and with each step the impact of the scent grew, mingled with the dampness of the dew. The dog rounded a gate, past a tree with leaves stiff with dew, and then stopped. The sound was there, low, intermittent, as if the night were ashamed to allow it. Her breathing quickened a notch, but her movement slowed, careful, as if the dawn itself might shatter. She sniffed the corner between a wall and a mound of boxes, and the discovery shone like a revelation. A baby, precariously wrapped, skin cold, hands clenched, a cry that seemed to give up before it could begin. The contrast hurt. The vulnerability of that tiny body clashed with the instinct awakening within her with tidal force. The world for an instant was reduced to 2 breaths. The baby's, short, irregular, almost without conviction, and hers, steady, measured, trying to lend rhythm to a life still learning to say yes. The approach wasn't theatrical, it was technical, the technique nature wrote where words can't reach. First, her snout measured the temperature of the surrounding air. Then, her flanks straightened to create a barrier against the wind. Finally, she lay close to the baby, and the heat began to travel, silently, like a blanket born from her own skin. Her front paw came over the top, not to hold, but to protect the tiny head, reducing exposure to the cold and establishing a safe contour. In this design, the dog became a shelter, and her cry, previously brittle, gained a new cadence, almost a confident whisper. The barks didn't come all at once. They came rhythmically with calculated intervals, like a password that only those who need it can decipher. She barked, breathed, listened. She barked again. It wasn't an alarm, it was a code. The street received these notes, and even if it took a while, someone would get there. Meanwhile, the dog's face remained close enough to warm, far enough away not to frighten. She surveyed her surroundings with eyes that learn what to fear before understanding why. If shadows moved, her body grew. If the wind shifted, she adjusted. Her position, guided by a discipline that doesn't ask for permission, protect first, think later. Some stories begin with fireworks. This one chose the path of patience. In minutes that felt like hours, the silent exchange between her warmth and the baby's body worked the transformation. The tremors subsided. The previously pale skin took on a less distant tone, each micro-decision adjusting. Her body a little more, moving the boxes away, supporting her head better with her paw, was a vow of life, and in that interval the dog didn't compromise with fatigue. The cold tried to seep through the cracks in her improvisation, and she closed each one with presence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. There's a hidden truth in how instincts work when there's no time for an instruction manual. What many would call impulse is in practice a survival protocol shaped by generations. In dogs, caring for puppies, even if they're not their own, can emerge when faced with specific cues: the smell of milk, temperature, crying pattern. The brain recognizes and responds, and when the response occurs in a real-life scenario like this one, everything that seems theoretical becomes a concrete journey. This is where mindset and decision-making collide. Faced with the unexpected, the body prioritizes. The dog chose a simple and powerful sequence: warm, protect, call. 3. Verbs, 1 goal. The neighborhood, at that moment, was a silent theater of revelations. No one inside the houses saw, but the impact of that scene radiated far beyond the alley. There are times when courage makes no noise. It only holds fast what is fragile. The baby, its head protected by its paw, began to synchronize its breathing with the dog's, as if learning a new metronome. And each new aligned breath was a small victory. There was no music, but if there had been, it would have followed the rhythm of 2 insistent breasts. The ritual barking continued, and time, which until then had seemed like an adversary, began to yield. In the distance, a window streaked the darkness with a rectangle of light. Someone woke, got up, searched for the source of that call that didn't threaten, but summoned. The dog didn't stop the code. She knew that each precise interval between one sound and the next guided the listener. No desperation, no hysteria, just precision. This sonic discipline is a detail that almost always goes unnoticed in stories. But here, it's part of the plot, like a baton passed from runner to runner during a relay race. The dampness of the floor, the roughness of the improvised paper, the smell of coal dust, all these elements composed a small universe of tension. The dog, even lying down, was movement. Her gaze swept, her nostrils read the air, her body rose a millimeter and then resealed the warmth. There was, in this care, a kind of effective engineering that dispensed with tools. The result, however, was metric. The crying no longer came as a lost sob, it emerged as a response. From each adjustment emerged a discrete proof that life was reorganizing itself. It's curious how, in critical situations, the human mind tends to seek grand explanations, while nature assembles the puzzle with small pieces. The hidden truth is that heroism often resides in the details, in the decision to lean in close, in the decision to cover the head, in the decision to bark without excess. What we would call instinct is, in practice, a precise knowledge of what matters. And when this knowledge meets the need, the scene we are witnessing is born. There was no improvisation in the sense of anything goes. There was a method. And this method is imbued with something we learned from observing dogs in their inner laws. Life, when consistently protected, finds space to rebuild itself. Little by little, the neighborhood returned signs. Footsteps at the end of the street. A creaking gate. A person approaching, hesitant, trying to understand the map drawn by spaced barks. The dog adjusted her body, but didn't give up her position. If something threatened, she would widen. If it were help, she would allow the approach. On her face there was a concentration that asked for no reward. There was only presence. A presence that holds the night so that the morning doesn't fail. At the first human contact, the outstretched hand trembled more from astonishment than from the cold. The flashlight swept the ground, found the outline of the dog, then the baby's skin, and stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverence. The person murmured something like, "Calm, calm." And the dog, without taking her paw off the baby's head, looked with a fidelity that said, "I'll stay, but you're coming." The negotiation was wordless. Life there was a common priority. Within seconds, other voices emerged in the background, and the street that had previously seemed absent began to join the scene, summoned by a code that worked. This is the moment when the narrative takes on a new dimension. Because when the first human realized what was before their eyes, a key was turned. What seemed like just a very cold night became a turning point, a transformation in how we view the instincts that surround us. And this transformation doesn't just affect those who live with dogs or love animals. It reaches the mindset with which we make decisions under pressure, the way we hear subtle cues amid the noise, the courage to do what needs to be done, even when no one is looking. The baby, protected, breathed as if finally finding a lap. The dog, now with one eye on the little one and the other on the street, remained guarded. The dim glow of the streetlight seemed warmer, perhaps because hope, when it appears, changes the light of things. And with each passing second, the scene said without saying, care is also a strategy. On one side, the ancient technique of warming, protecting, calling. On the other, the arrival of those who can provide follow-up care, ambulance, thermal, blanket, trained arms. Between these two ends, a whole history of choices that make sense. If you've made it this far, you've already realized how the behind-the-scenes events of that early morning reveal more than just a rescue. They speak of connection, of reading the world, of a kind of truth that only reveals itself when the heart is attentive. And as new voices approach and the night prepares to receive what's coming, it's clear that it was the dog who first decided that life deserved the dawn. There are still important details of this journey to follow closely, and each one expands our understanding of courage and care. Comment. That makes sense to me. Time seemed like a living entity that morning. Each minute dragged by as if trying to test the endurance of everyone involved. The fragile baby emitted intermittent cries, almost begging for the world to acknowledge his presence, and the attentive dog remained close to him, becoming the only barrier between the cold and life. Her body heat spread through the little one, a silent but vital process. In situations like these, every degree of temperature makes a difference. Newborn's body loses heat much faster than an adult's, and without a constant source of heat, the risk of hypothermia increases with each passing minute. There, in that forgotten corner, the canine warmth was the thin line that kept the baby breathing. The barks came in intervals, almost timed, as if the dog knew she needed to get attention without scaring the baby. It was a deep, steady sound that repeated itself with mathematical precision, reverberating off the alley's walls and through the cracks in the surrounding houses. It was a warning code, and at the same time, a summons to anyone awake in that part of the city. Time followed its merciless course. 5, 10, 15 minutes. The dog's body began to tremble, not from fear, but from exertion. Remaining still, keeping warm, and warding off any other curious animals that might approach was an exhausting task. And still she didn't move. A brief but important aside is worth noting. Maternal behavior in dogs is so powerful that it can manifest even in females who have never had puppies. Science explains that the scent and sound of a baby activate regions of the brain linked to caregiving, stimulating protective and approach behaviors. It's as if nature had engraved a code that, when activated, transforms instinct into practical action, and that night this code was activated flawlessly. Every bark was measured, every adjustment of position calculated to keep the baby's head protected from the wind blowing through the street. The tension only increased. Time was against them. Dawn was approaching, and the cold seemed to grow denser. The dog's breath was visible in the air, creating small clouds of vapor that quickly dissipated. She leaned her body toward the baby every time the wind shifted, acting as a natural shield. At one point, a cat approached, curious about the soft cries. The dog let out a short, firm growl, which was enough to drive the intruder away. The baby continued to breathe irregularly, but alive. It was like watching a silent dance, where every movement had weight and consequence. The next few minutes felt like hours. If you were watching from afar, you would see only a motionless brown silhouette, but there, at the center of that scene, a battle was taking place. The dog's body was beginning to grow damp from contact with the cold ground, but she didn't move. Away for a second. Her breathing was the metronome that marked the rhythm of her resistance. It was impressive to see how determination transformed into strategy. She didn't waste energy, she didn't bark excessively, she didn't move unnecessarily. It was a kind of heroism that isn't displayed. It just happens. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. When we think of heroes, we often imagine grand gestures, grandiose deeds, but the truth is that heroism, more often than not, looks like this. Small decisions, repeated without giving up, that ultimately add up to something gigantic. Every second that baby spent protected increased her chances of survival. Every time the dog adjusted her position to block a gust of wind, she was, in fact, choosing to stay alive. The impact of this behavior is enormous, and anyone who has experienced emergency situations knows that sometimes it's this silent constancy that saves. Gradually, the environment began to respond to the call. A motorcycle headlight streaked across the street, and for a few seconds the sound of the engine competed with the rhythm of the barking. The dog stood firm, her eyes shining in the light coming from outside. There was no fear there, only alertness. Soon after, footsteps, first one, then another, echoing on the wet asphalt. The dog let out a different bark, higher pitched, as if to say, "Here it is." The baby stirred, and she immediately adjusted her body, ensuring it remained warm. The scene was a powerful contrast. The extreme vulnerability of a newborn and the silent strength of an animal refusing to give in to exhaustion. And the more we look back at that moment, the more we understand it wasn't just raw instinct. It was a survival mindset that seemed guided by something greater. There's a hidden truth in all this. Sometimes life's behind-the-scenes moments are held together by heroes no one expected. And this dog, alone in that alley, was exactly that. The link that kept the thread of life intact until help arrived. The sound of human voices grew louder, bringing with it a wave of relief. But the tension still hadn't completely dissipated. The dog raised her head, watched carefully, but kept her paw on the baby's head until the last possible second, as if she only truly trusted when she was certain the child was safe. Time, which until then had been an enemy, was beginning to become an ally. Each passing second brought the baby closer to the human warmth that could take over the mission. But for now, the guardian remained there, ready for another round of barking, another round of vigilance. A transformation is taking place before our eyes, from an ordinary night into a story that would be told for a long time to come. And every detail of this heroic moment is proof that courage doesn't need an audience to exist. It's sustained by the choice to continue, by the decision not to abandon one's post, by the persistence of maintaining the heat even when the body tires. And it's at this point in the story that we begin to see not only the act itself, but its impact on the outcome that's about to unfold. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. The sound of footsteps echoing on the wet asphalt seemed both a relief and a final test of the dog's courage. She remained motionless until the last moment, her eyes fixed on the approaching shadows, her muscles tense as wire. Then, as the flashlight beams swept the alley and illuminated the small, precariously wrapped body, there was a brief moment of silence, as if even dawn had stopped to witness. The first neighbor knelt slowly, extending his hand, but the dog emitted a low growl, not a threat but a warning. "This is fragile, be careful." It was a sound that blended protection and a plea for trust. The scene had such a powerful impact that the few seconds of hesitation felt like an eternity. It was at this point that the transformation began. The neighbor called someone else. The news spread through the houses, and soon a small, silent crowd gathered around the alley. The sound of cell phone notifications mingled with the sound of the wind. Someone called emergency services, another fetched a blanket. Each seemed to understand. They were participating in something greater than a simple nighttime occurrence. It was as if a hidden truth was slowly being revealed, that the dog's instinct had done what we humans are often slow to do, act without waiting for guarantees. The next few minutes were a blur, as if the world had suddenly woken up. A distant siren began to swell on the horizon, cutting through the early morning silence and transforming the alley into a rescue scene. The dog remained alert, ears swiveling at every sound, her body still close to the baby, as if to say that custody would only be handed over at the right moment. The sound of the ambulance stopping, the door slamming, the hurried footsteps of the rescuers, everything seemed amplified. A rescuer knelt beside the baby and, in a firm but calm voice, said, "He's cold, but he's breathing. We need to warm him up quickly." Another rescuer spread the thermal blanket and, in a delicate movement, wrapped the baby. The dog followed each movement with her eyes, her body ready to react if anything sounded strange. The pediatrician, assessing the situation, quietly commented to those present, "If it weren't for the warmth she maintained, the outcome would have been different. She regulated his temperature better than many pieces of equipment could in the field." It was a simple sentence, but charged with authority, confirmation that her behavior wasn't just instinct, it was a survival strategy. The veterinarian, who had been called in as a precaution, added, "This is classic maternal behavior." She not only protected him, but also kept his breathing steady through contact. This exchange of words added even more emotion to the moment. It wasn't just a story of luck, it was a journey of decisions and courage that connected at just the right time. As the baby was placed on the makeshift stretcher and carried to the ambulance, there was a dramatic pause. The dog took a step forward, hesitant, as if wanting to follow. She even placed her front paws on the step, but one of the rescuers knelt down and said softly, "It's okay. He's safe now." It was as if this small gesture had been the signal she needed to allow herself to rest. Her breathing, which had been rapid, began to slow. She lay down, her head still turned toward the vehicle, as if saying goodbye without taking her eyes off it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. What happened in that moment goes beyond a simple rescue. It's the point where two journeys converge, that of the baby, who needed a miracle to get through that night, and that of the dog, who had to trust strangers to hand over what she most protected. This trust isn't automatic. Behind the scenes of animal behavior, there's a reading process that involves signals, tone of voice, and body posture. It's a silent negotiation that determines whether the animal relaxes or resists. And that night, the dog chose to trust. This decision, even without words, was the emotional climax of the scene. It was as if she said, "I've done my part, now it's yours." The ambulance's lights reflected off the alley's walls, creating red and blue spots that danced across the wet ground. People around were still in shock, some with tears in their eyes, others taking photos or videos to record this unlikely encounter. The dog continued to watch, but now with a different expression, as if knowing its mission had been accomplished. The alley, which had previously seemed a forgotten place, now held an almost sacred atmosphere. Something had happened there that would forever change not only the baby's life, but the mindset of everyone who witnessed it. As the ambulance slowly departed, carrying the little one protected by a thermal blanket, the dog was welcomed by one of the neighbors, who bent down and stroked her damp fur. There was no resistance. She accepted the caress, as if finally allowing herself to rest. It was a scene that resonated like a revelation. True heroism is often silent, doesn't demand applause, but transforms everything around it. The impact of that early morning would ripple through the following days, in street corner conversations, in local newspaper headlines, in the hearts of every witness. And even with the baby already on the way to the hospital, the feeling that the story wasn't over yet lingered. There was more to understand, more layers to explore about how nature and instinct intersect to save lives. He comments, "That makes sense to me." Days later, the news spread like wildfire. The baby, who had fought for his life that morning, was now breathing peacefully in the hospital crib, with rosy cheeks and a serene look that seemed to offer silent thanks. Doctors confirmed that without the dog's constant warmth, his chances of survival would have been slim. It was one of those stories that stirs not only our emotions, but also our way of seeing the world, because deep down, it wasn't just a dog protecting a baby. It was a living reminder that empathy isn't a human privilege. What we call instinct is also empathy in action, an immediate response to another's suffering, without calculations, without expecting anything in return. The dog, now known throughout the neighborhood as the hero of the night, received veterinary care and was given a safe space to recover. She was calmer. Her coat was beginning to regain its shine, and there was an air of peace when she lay in the sun, as if she knew she had accomplished her mission. For many who followed the story, that scene became a turning point, a silent transformation of mindset. If an animal was capable of dedicating hours of vigil and protection to save a fragile life, how much more could we do for those who depend on us? It's impossible not to think about the decisions we make every day. How many times do we ignore a distant cry, a veiled cry for help, a neighbor in distress? This story carries a hidden truth that goes beyond rescue. It calls us to be more attentive, more present, more human. Responsibly adopting, for example, isn't just about providing food and a roof over our heads. It's about committing to a life that also experiences fear, pain, and joy. Supporting local rescues isn't just a nice gesture to post on social media. It's literally extending a helping hand in situations where every minute counts, and learning to recognize emergency signs. An injured animal, a baby at risk, a lonely elderly person, can be the deciding factor between loss and hope. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. The impact of this story doesn't end at the hospital or the alley where it all happened. It resonates with those who heard it, with those who stopped to reflect on what it truly means to care. What we experience here is a behind-the-scenes journey that reveals something essential. Life always finds a way to continue, but it needs allies. And that day, the chosen ally was a dog who used every resource she had, warmth, vigilance, courage, to keep a small flame burning. It's inspiring to think that even in the world's apparent chaos, there are these small intersections where instinct transforms into salvation. There's something deeply symbolic at the end of this story. Today, a bark turned into a hug. The sound that began as a warning ended as a welcome, and this image remains etched in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. The scene of a dog lying next to a baby is more than beautiful. It's a silent statement that care is a force that can transcend species, barriers, and fears. And perhaps that's why so many people were moved by reading the news, seeing the images, sensing that something greater was at stake that morning. The lesson learned is simple and yet profound. Heroism doesn't need a cape. Empathy doesn't need applause. And life, when defended, flourishes. If this story touched you, leave a thank you heroine in the comments and help spread this message of love and courage. This is the best way to show that stories like this live on, inspiring new decisions and new journeys. Because deep down, each of us has the chance to be someone's shelter when the cold outside seems unbearable. If you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't just a story about a dog and a baby. It was a reminder of how small gestures can change entire destinies. And that's why I want to invite you to continue this journey with me. If this video touched you in any way, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," because I want to know who really lived this experience with me until the very last seconds. Please leave a like, as this shows that this type of content resonates with you and helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire and warm your heart. And if you're not yet part of this community, subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any future stories and will continue following this series of life-changing moments. There's a video here that complements this topic and will take you even deeper into this reflection. Click and stay with me there because our conversation doesn't end here.